Okay, I think we're going to start. So firstly, welcome everyone. Great to have you here. Our webinars have always followed the same format, always with a cheeky question, with the idea that actually probably it's not so easy to answer. Each question has many answers. And this one was, can domestic tourism live up to expectations? My name is Laurice Taitz-Buntman, and I'm the publisher and editor of Johannesburg in Your Pocket City Guide. And we're a digital and print city guide to Joburg. And we're also part of an international city guide series. And in the work we do, we connect very widely across the city and more across the country. And I think that's also given us a very it's allowed us to see things from a different perspective, I would say, not a traditional perspective. And what we do see is that there is quite a fractured environment. Often there is a lack of connection between things that should be connected. And it would be more of an enabling environment if there was more connection. And as a business that focuses all day long on helping people navigating spaces and cities, we thought holding these discussions was a natural extension, because it's about trying to navigate a new tourism landscape that has opened up in the wake of COVID. This is our fifth discussion, focused on tourism and hospitality, and our topics are varied. We've looked at life in a quarantine hotel. We looked at the impact of COVID on festivals, also on restaurants. And you can view all the videos. Here's the punt for our YouTube channel on Johannesburg in Your Pockets YouTube channel. And then just to move to some housekeeping before we start, we have Louise Whitworth, who's our deputy editor. She'll be managing comments in the chat and helping to address questions in Zoom. Our project manager, Malusi Klatchwayo, will be doing the same on Facebook, where people will be watching the live stream. And a huge thank you to Dan Stillerman of the Excel Academy, who jumped in at the last minute when this webinar became totally oversubscribed, and I panicked on how to get it to everyone who wants to watch it. So thank you again. Excel Academy offers excellent online training courses and are also absolute webinar pros. So they're the people to speak to if you want to host something similar. So
thanks, Laurice.
Sure. Moving to the business of the day. Today I focus on domestic tourism. And why this topic came up is because domestic tourism is sort of being proposed as the shiny light at the end of what has been and continues to be a very dark tunnel. But before lockdown, it was under delivering. And I looked at research from 2018, which was the latest research I could find that looked in detail at domestic tourism. And it showed that domestic tourism had actually declined despite the intention to develop it as the backbone of the tourism sector. The biggest percentage of domestic trips were so-called VFRs, visiting friends and relatives, and they hadn't been converted into taking day trips or into visiting cultural attractions around the country. There's also many other issues, and we'll go into those, from affordability and pricing structures. And to take it just one step further, speaking as Johannesburg in Your Pocket, we hold the firm belief that strengthening domestic tourism is also an answer to strengthening tourism in general to South Africa. So we believe that the belief in the destination is key to any tourism effort. So the two can't be separated so easily. Today, we've got a fantastic panel to share their insights. All of them are really true travel ambassadors. So thank you all for giving your time. We have the CEO of SA Tourism, Sisa Ntshona, who has probably been online more in the last few weeks than anyone we know. We have travel blogger and author and explorer of unexpected places, Heather Mason, who writes under the name Two Summers. We have travel curator Senzelwe Mthembu, who heads up the lived experience and also documents her travels to showcase the continent, designing and curating experiences. And you can find her on Instagram under Senzelwe. And then we have travel writer Jared Ruttenburg of Jared in Cape Town, who I have designated as the luxury correspondent today because of his recent travels. So we've also had many questions sent in about current policy and about the country's recovery plan. And while it's not the topic for this session, because we want to look ahead of that, Sisa, it would be great if we start with you. If you can just give us a quick snapshot of where we are right now.
Thank you, Laurice, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and I think more than anything is I'm looking forward to the engagement that we're going to have. The strangest thing, as though I do a lot of the speaking, but I learn a lot every single time we have an engagement, with the sector in itself. So where are we? The short answer is not where we want to be, but essentially it's about understanding that if you had asked me in January what was our plans for the year, I could literally laid it out for you what we're going to be doing when, what our targets and everything else is. And what COVID has done is simply, made all those plans obsolete. Now, South Africa is following what we call the risk-adjusted framework. We all know level 5 to level 1. And tourism was previously allocated to come into play at level 1. Now, whilst there's certainty surely from at which level tourism or different places of tourism are allowed to activate, what we don't know is when that will happen. Just some quick context as well is that the sector then got together and implemented what we call health and operational protocols that aim to de-risk it from being a level 1 operation to a level 3, essentially. Where we find ourselves currently is where we have got domestic tourism allowed, but only for business travel or essential travel. I think that's the first one. So we still are not allowed to do leisure tourism. We still are not allowed to travel amongst provinces as well. And I think that's the next stage that we're all waiting forward to in order to enable this to kind of the sector to pick up quite significantly. I think all of us, and equally myself, were disappointed. I think, was it about 2 weeks ago when the president came on? And instead of what we thought was going to leap us forward, kind of really kind of set us back, from two things essentially. One is a ban on liquor, which obviously impacts the hospitality sector quite significantly, and also the curfew as well. So suddenly now 9 p.m. became the time that you all would be indoors, and we thought that leisure would be allowed as well. So that's essentially the backdrop where we're at. The sector is under tremendous strain. On a daily basis, there are businesses that are just falling off. And it's not about big or small, but right across the board, you can see that squeeze coming through. You mentioned a little bit about the recovery plan. Now, key elements around the recovery plan actually are no different from any other recovery plans around the world, that it will be led by domestic first, then regional, then international, right? And essentially the whole logic behind that one is all about confidence that tourists have in terms of exploring their own backyard first and then delving further and further down the line as well. So I think with that kind of backdrop is that essentially we are waiting for when further announcements are made based on the epidemiological kind of reaction in the country. We're seeing the numbers now spiking up quite significantly. When you speak about 10,000 new infections being reported on a daily basis, it really kind of scares us a bit. But hopefully we will reach our peak either in August, September, and then thereafter, as they say, flatten the curve and start to get some activity back. Now, the tension that lies now in terms of how quickly and which parts of the sector do you start to open up in order to get the activity happening again. And I think I'll leave it at that for now, and I'm happy to engage further on any other issues. Thanks, Laurice.
Great. One question that I want to ask you before we move on is, what would be, if I asked you why don't South Africans travel the country? What would you say? I just want one reason as the way you see it.
I don't know. How would you want to not to travel this beautiful country of ours? Laurice, like with many things, there is just no one reason. I think it's a whole concoction of things that are coming together. And without taking too much time, it's got to do with a bit of our history as well, where the majority of the population actually don't have travel embedded within them, because 40 years ago, you needed visas just to move from one city to the next. So you got to deal with that. Secondly, as well, is how the sector is structured in itself, the tourism sector, that it's actually geared and pointing very definitively overseas for hard currency and not being able to pivot internally. And I think with all those in the mix, it'll be lovely conversation to have, and I'm looking for advice as well and guidance as to what we could do to get domestic tourism happening. That's just my last statement. If you look at many strong tourism economies around the world, they're built on a very robust domestic sector overlaid by international one. South Africa is the other way around, and we've got to change that, because now we've got a concentration risk on overseas. And we saw that when the world decided that all of Africa has Ebola, they essentially did not travel, and we're left with a very weak domestic sector. And I think now is the time to actually, when we open up again, to address some of the structural issues there.
Right. Heather, I'm going to turn to you because you seem to travel the least traveled paths very often. I mean, a few weeks ago, you were in Katlehong and you made me want to go to Katlehong. So my question to you is, you travel to places that don't even think of themselves as tourist destinations. What's the attraction of those places? And what do you think they're missing in terms of promoting them?
Well, first of all, thanks, Laurice. Thanks for having me here. You know, obviously I have a different, even though I've lived in South Africa for 10 years, I have a different perspective because I'm a foreigner, as everyone can tell from my accent. I'm American, and I think sort of accidentally when I moved here, I started writing a blog, and at the same time I started seeing every single thing in my life here as tourism. You know, I'm just kind of I see everything through the lens of kind of being a permanent tourist. And so for me, you know, moving to Johannesburg, I mean, Joburg right off the bat was just this brand new huge metropolis, and everything is interesting and different to me, you know. So I think I just built on that over the years. I've just kind of continued to sort of look at this city and this country in that way. And yeah, I've always sort of taken the view, you know, a lot of times people ask me like, oh, why would you go to this place? Why would you go to Alex? Why would you go to Sandton? Why would you go to Ferndale? You know, I see every place as a tourist attraction. Every Joburg suburb, every South African city, every small town has something interesting, has interesting people, interesting stories. And, you know, I've been lucky enough to travel to a lot of different places since I became a travel writer, you know, around South Africa and to other countries within the region, around the world. But to me, South Africa just has an endless supply of interesting places. And, you know, this year, before the pandemic stopped everything, you know, I was on this mission to visit 10 different small towns in all the different provinces, you know, that I had never been to, and writing about each one. And I only made it to 2, unfortunately, before things were interrupted. But it's proved my point over and over. There's no shortage of interesting things, no matter where you go.
Right. We're going to move to Senzelwe. I'm actually I love what you said about storytelling, because I think that's a vital part that needs to be recognized, the role of storytelling in travel and in creating travel dreams. But Senzelwe, I wanted to come to you in terms of, we had a few chats about this, that the kind of gap between perception and reality of why South Africans might feel they can't travel or don't travel. And I wanted you can add.
So I think, you know, something important that Heather mentioned was basically like her worldview about travel, or what her travel philosophy is. And I have a similar one, is I don't only think of very popular places or you know, the well-known tourist destinations as you know, the only places that are worth exploring. So growing up, you know, I've grown up in Johannesburg, but I was kind of always called rural KwaZulu-Natal home. And so even doing that drive from the city, from an urban space to a rural space in KZN, for me, that was a travel experience, and a valid travel experience. So I think the way we perceive our space and our country has a lot to do with the way we experience it. That's one. When we talk about perception versus reality, I think, you know, one of the reasons why we might not travel domestically so much is because we perceive domestic tourism to be unwelcoming. We perceive it to be expensive. We perceive ourselves not to be the target market for domestic tourism. And some of that, actually, a lot of it is true, or I think is warranted perception. But there needs to be more work, just, for more of us to close that gap between how locals perceive this country, versus how we experience it. And I think Sisa also touched on this, is like historically, there's a lot of exclusion that's taken place, which is an inherited sense of exclusion that a lot of us kind of feel. But I think when you begin to change your mindset and approach to being a tourist and traveling, you do away, you kind of chip away at that perception or feeling excluded. But there's a lot of work to be done for making people feel more included, and not just giving people a feeling of inclusion, but really going out of our ways in terms of marketing, in terms of making local people feel like they are a priority when it comes to traveling within the country, and that they are the ambassadors for tourism in this country. So yeah, I'll just leave it there. But I think when it comes to perception, there's real warranted kind of perceptions of how we experience the country, and then there's maybe another side that we need to explore. Yeah.
Thank you. No, I mean, you talked about that inherited sense of exclusion, and for me, where it really rings true is sometime last year we started a series of walks for concierge staff at hotels within Joburg neighborhoods, and it was amazing to us to see how many people working in the hotel sector actually didn't feel comfortable in the neighborhoods that they were working in. So they would come to work, stand behind the desk all day, fielding questions, where people would think that they were experts because they're in Rosebank, but they wouldn't know much about the neighborhood. And actually one of the biggest things to come out of the walks was this idea that people were quite shocked how safe it was to walk a block in Rosebank, which I would say is probably one of the most easily walkable neighborhoods in Joburg, and also very shocked to learn what was in the blocks around their hotels. So it was eye-opening for us that people hadn't felt welcome enough for many reasons to even just explore a block around the front door. So really a key point. I'm going to move to Jared because we're going to raise a whole lot of different issues, and we'll come back, and please feel free to sort of intervene. Jared seems to have the lifestyle that everybody aspires to, which is this joy of experiencing luxury travel, which he shares with everyone. And it's also that I think from where he's sitting, he's also got a view of luxury travel that can maybe is also around can break down something around perception and reality, because luxury travel is also the one space that really has been marketed to an international audience. And I think that is a space that it comes up all the time, that locals feel they can't access it. So Jared, we'd love your input on that.
Thanks, Laurice. And just let the record state that, yes, I do have the privilege of profiling several luxury establishments, but also across the board. I'm in the interesting position where 50% of my audience is international. So a lot of my audience are looking for, when they do come to South Africa, they're looking for those high-end experiences. And it's a privilege to be able to say that South Africa very readily welcomes them and has an incredible array of options for them. But I think what's interesting, and perhaps a comment, is that when we're talking about why do South Africans not explore the country more, something that I've noticed in conversations I've had with those who have a little bit more to spend on their budgets immediately look to international holidays. The whole idea behind the grass is greener, or we want a different experience. And so for some of the people who enjoy skiing, for example, or enjoy mountains, and I ask them, well, tell me, what do you think about the Drakensberg, and what are some of your favorite places there? And they say, oh, we've actually never been to the Drakensberg. So it's interesting that local travel or domestic travel is often seen as second rate, that we need to have this really exciting experience, and therefore we're going to go and we're going to hike in the Alps. Or if they enjoy diving, and I ask them, well, what are your experiences of Northern KZN, so Ntshona? And they say, oh no, we've never actually dived in South Africa, and yet they have the qualifications for it. So I think it's a dual thing of both being able to say to our international guests, we have a lot here that's really waiting for you, but for South Africans to say, look on the home turf also, don't always immediately look elsewhere. The challenge, of course, and I see that a couple of comments have come up, is that the prices, that luxury travel in South Africa is often seen as exorbitantly expensive because it's aimed at an international market. And so there are a couple of things that are happening around that. Right now, we've seen that lodges, particularly lodges, game reserves, are being forced to reevaluate how they do things. And many of them, I mean, I think Alicia made some good comments there. How about they simplify? They don't do this many meals or this many drinks. And a lot of these game reserves are doing that. The challenge, of course, is that it comes at the expense of often salaried staff members, because often you're paying for staff members by virtue of being there, but also the conservation projects. And so I think we as South Africans would love to see more value, but also need to realize that often the places that we go to, there's a high value attached because of the amount of staff or the conservation projects that are associated with it. However, one little tip, and many South Africans don't know this, is that many places that you would think are out of reach financially have SADC rates or special rates for South Africans, but they don't actually advertise it on their websites. And it takes a simple email to reservations@whereveris.com and saying to them, please could you send me your South African or the SADC rates, or we're looking at coming with my family. And even outside of pandemic, I've been surprised at how many establishments have these. They just don't readily advertise them on the websites. And so my encouragement would be, we need to really encourage these lodges and hotels to make those rates available on their websites and in their marketing, so at least South Africans can begin to see this is not completely out of reach for us.
I think that the email tip is a vital one. Very useful information. Sisa, I was wondering, what markets can we compare ourselves to, and how they, is there a market in another country that has actually tackled this problem and won?
Well, we're a unique destination. We're a beautiful country. No one can compare to us. Just to weigh in there a bit, one of the frustrations I have of running SA Tourism, I get to market something and profile it to the world, but I've got absolutely no control over the delivery of the service nor the pricing of it, right? So what we do is to try to say as much as possible to the private sector who actually own these tourism products, please consider the local domestic market, et cetera, et cetera. But typically what would happen, because they're profit maximizers, right? They would just choose the region or the area that will actually give them the most revenue from the perspective. Now, we live in a free economic society, so we can't prescribe as government that you will charge $10 for this one, you will charge $15 for this one. We saw this practice probably in the 90s and 2000s, generally around the world. But I think we're moving now where the opportunity, in my view, lies, in what we call dynamic pricing, right? Essentially, because part of the problem is not knowing when and how to travel. Part of the issues in South Africa is that we all go on holiday at the same time to the same place. So, and we all compete for the same bed. So you can imagine what happens then to the price inflation of that one. So, through dynamic pricing, in a similar way that you could electronically look through a device, whether it's an app or website, to know when is off-peak, enable themselves to price correctly, as opposed to have one flat price across the board there. The other one is the participants of the tourism sector. And I'm talking about travel agencies. I'm talking about tour operators, for example. Here's what happens. I look at how they package this country, and it's the same deals or same structure of packaging that we've seen for the last 10, 15 years, right? A little bit of Cape Town, Garden Route, Kruger, the Golden Triangle, over and over and over again. It shows me a lack of diversity in the industry itself, that actually they don't know enough about their own country to include other elements that actually add to the flavor. And the key thing here is not about a zero-sum game where you take one and replace another one, but it's about adding on, right? Different layers as well. So whether you're talking about rural tourism, you talk about township tourism, you talk about urban tourism, anything that adds to this pot. So on one hand, I'm always kind of wanting to invite new people to enter the sector and actually offer new packages and new products. And certainly I can put my hand on heart, as I say, tourism, we will be willing and able to support those and profile them so we can get more people to travel to the country as well. So where has similar things happened around the world? Look, I can't give you a definitive country, but it all starts with, from an early age, around the culture of travel. You know, at a high school, not only in high school, at preschool level, right, where we ignite the imagination of young kids, as an example. Certainly when I grew up, we used to go to the park or to the zoo as part of a school trip. I'm not sure if those still happen. So that, and it's more than money, by the way, it's also about confidence. There's nothing worse than having the money and paying for the service, but you still feel like an outsider in this posh establishment, right? Because you can imagine the first time that you actually boarded an airplane, the first time you check in at a hotel, the first time you hire a car. We tend to assume that these just come naturally. And all these are barriers, an example, because no one wants to look like an idiot. But how then do we start to engender this at a young age to make sure that that starts to evolve and ultimately to showcase all of our country? At times, I don't feel confident that we know enough about our country as South Africans, right? And there's a joke that usually goes around that if you want to know about South Africa, ask a foreigner. Not only can they tell you about the Drakensberg, but about specific details and all sort of issues around it that actually embarrasses us as well. But what COVID has done, it has given us a golden opportunity to press the reset button. It is up to us how we choose to emerge from this. And because domestic tourism is with us for the foreseeable short-term future, let's make the best out of it and make sure that both from the industry side, we can make a play to say, well, we prioritize domestic, and also from a domestic side to actually say that we also prioritize to know our own country. And it's also about the psyche, I suppose, even of South Africans. And I'll just go beyond tourism, that we tend to value things outside of our own country, you know, whether it's be vehicles or items of clothing, whatever it is, and the local item is seen as inferior. We need to change this. And I think it can start with tourism.
I'm going to take your lead, and in the nicest way possible, I'm going to out Heather as the foreigner and say, Heather, give us from what are the elements that you'd include to add to, as Sisa said, the flavor of tourism in this country? What do you think's missing in a kind of mainstream view of it?
I mean, I agree completely with what Sisa just said. I mean, you know, when you think of all the people I know who are foreigners who come here, you know, usually Americans, they're all on that same route that you're talking about. They go to Cape Town, they go to the Garden Route, they go to Kruger. Sometimes because of me, if they've read my blog, they might spend a night or two in Joburg, you know. So that is obviously, that's my number one. I mean, Joburg, this is the heart of this country. It's, you know, it's got the history. It's got this incredible, you know, fashion and art vibe. I mean, obviously, Laurice, I know I'm preaching to the choir with you. This is also your job to promote Joburg, but that's number one. And then number two is yeah, we have a huge country. We have, you know, Limpopo. I mean, Limpopo is probably my favorite province to visit as a tourist. You know, I love in northern Limpopo the art scene. You know, Venda art, and you know, Zanin has some amazing places to stay. I'm not going to call out specific places because that wouldn't be fair. But you know, there's a million different directions to go. There's Mpumalanga. There, you know, the Blyde River Canyon, which kind of, I feel like a lot of locals know about that, but probably not many foreigners do, and they should. And even within the Western Cape, there's a million, you know, wonderful small towns. I was on my way to visit Prince Albert. That was my next town that I was supposed to go to before the lockdown hit, and I've never been there, but you know, those places in the mountains in the Western Cape are beautiful, and there's so many very affordable places to stay. I mean, I love staying in guest houses and B&Bs and self-catering places, you know, and I think like there is a sector of our domestic, you know, our locals who know about that kind of travel. But I think it's underutilized. It's to me, like I've been lucky enough to stay in really luxurious places as a travel blogger and writer. But when I'm traveling on my own dime, I would never consider staying in a luxury lodge. I mean, no offense to the luxury lodges, I just can't afford it, you know, but I love staying in self-catering places, you know, in towns in Limpopo, towns in the Western Cape, the Eastern Cape, I mean, the Wild Coast. Yeah, I could go on forever, but I think it's just a matter of looking outside those very popular places. You don't have to look very hard to find millions, you know.
Great. Senzelwe, you've been involved in curating experiences for travelers. I'd love you to follow on from Heather in terms of what you see as the elements you'd like to add flavor to the tourism package.
So just in terms of adding flavor, I know there was an international conference. I think it took place in Germany. Sisa, I think you were there. And the German tourists were saying, this is what I heard anyways, the German tourists were saying sort of what is the new story that South Africa has to tell, and who's telling the story? Is it the older generation? Is it youth telling the story? So when I think of Soweto, for example, as a travel destination, I don't only see the history and the past of South Africa, but I also see a new culture emerging. I see a lot of the creative industry emerging in this country. And I think we sleep on so many of those things. There's restaurants, there's events, there's music. These are all the things that make up who we are as South Africans. And I think we need to be kind of forging forward towards what is the new narrative. But so outside of sort of township tourism, I would also add rural tourism to the mix. My sister and I, under the lived experience, we curated a Zululand campout. And I think, again, we're sleeping on the remote parts of our country. I think rural tourism offers a very unique experience, and just even for people who are interested in wellness. I think after this kind of lockdown period, people will be looking to have fireside chats and conversations. People will want to be breathing clean, fresh air. People just want, you know, real experiences that aren't kind of doled up necessarily. So, I mean, I'm one person who I think every experience appeals to me, whether it's luxury, whether it's a small town that not many people have heard of, or whether it's rural experiences. I think there's really something special that all of these experiences offer. Even Johannesburg, even a city that, I mean, so many people look down on Johannesburg. There's a vibe to Johannesburg that is unmatched. Rooftops in Johannesburg are just beautiful. And I think when you experience the city from above, it just gives you a different perspective. All the markets that we have on Sundays and Saturdays. I mean, all of these things, just there's such a buzz and an energy in all spaces. And I think we need to be focusing on those things. We need to be focusing on what are unique, interesting, personalized experiences that we can create and curate. My only fear and worry, I guess, is there is a big, I think, an aspirational look towards luxury travel. And so even in all the conversations that take place on social media about why is domestic tourism so expensive, I think when we have those conversations, we're thinking about one type of travel. And we don't think about all these other different types of experiences that we can have that aren't that exorbitantly priced. Yes, we should think of locals when we're pricing luxury trips, but there's so much on offer. And I also just want to add that in the experience curation space, there are a lot of budding sort of young businesses and young people who are, you know, the ambassadors of tourism in this country. I'm not going to name them, there's so many, but I think they have a responsibility. I myself am a you know, experience curator. We have a responsibility to think outside of the box, but also would love support and would love access to market. And I guess my biggest fear is when it comes to rural tourism and sort of heritage and history of this country. In Zululand, for example, I know internationals love that kind of stuff. I know, you know, people from the UK, for example, often come to KwaZulu-Natal and they want to learn about the history, the war history of that province, and gravitate towards these very, you know, real grounded experiences where they're just meeting local people and having a meal cooked by an ordinary South African citizen, and just, you know, the most basic things that I experience when I visit my grandmother. Foreigners love that kind of stuff. And I just wonder if we as South Africans can kind of rethink and kind of like come back home and come back to, you know, the experiences that make us who we are, and enjoy those and savor them and see them as, you know, worthy experiences. That's why I said in the beginning, is driving from Johannesburg to rural KwaZulu-Natal, that's a travel experience for me. I view it as such. I stop over in small towns and you know, I just think we need to think outside of the box, but we also need to adopt a new mindset when it comes to travel. So yeah, that's my contribution.
I think one of the things that struck me is also just what an authentic, you know, even if you talk about Johannesburg, what an authentic destination it is. We aren't a mainstream destination in so many different ways, and yet we haven't realized the beauty and attraction of that people don't want, you know, so many travelers don't want a generic experience. They're not looking for something that came out of a box. And that's why people end up going to visit Soweto and get utterly seduced by an experience, you know, take a cycling trip with Levo Soweto backpackers and be utterly seduced and fall in love with Soweto. So I think we've undervalued that. Another point I just want to raise, and then I've got a question for Jared, was also just, we did a webinar about what's a festival without a gathering, and it just looked at like what the future of festivals are. And I just think we've so undervalued what we can offer in terms of cultural events, that we often look at tourism as things that have always been here, as opposed to things that are live and happening right now and are more kind of fluid and transient, or an event that happens once a year. I think it's only when Afropunk landed on the calendar, and that hasn't been for very long, was the first time you got a sense that people understood you could attract people to the destination purely for a 48-hour music event. So I think this whole, also this kind of the hybrid version of festivals is being now digital, and, you know, hopefully at some stage will also take place in a physical realm. But we've got an opportunity to actually share festivals with the whole world now in a way we never have before. So I think there's an opportunity there. I just wanted to raise with Jared, because Jared's got very strong views on how we create confidence in our tourism products. And I wanted to get his views on that.
A key word there is confidence, but I would push that in the direction of positivity, because in the discussions that some of us have had, and certainly in peers in the journalism circles, there is this overarching hopelessness at the moment. We're in a dark space, as you used the word earlier, a dark tunnel. But despite the challenges, and not to negate them at all, we have the most incredible opportunities in our country. And having the privilege of highlighting those on social media and through some of the writing I've been doing over the past couple of months, I've had so many people write into me and say, thank you. We just need to be reminded that there is beauty out there. We need to be reminded of everything that's out there waiting for us. And whilst we know we can't go there right now, soon we'll be able to do that. And so I think the role for travel writers, the storytellers, the bloggers, those who are on social media, we've always carried the privilege, in essence, of being at the forefront or the vanguard of bringing hope. I think the responsibility is just upped at the moment. And so all of us have the chance and the privilege, and I specifically use the word the privilege to be able to share these stories at the moment. I saw, I think it was Di commented on one of the questions about some of the great campaigns that South African tourism has run in the past. And so my question is now exactly, what great campaigns can we run? Can we unite? And the beauty is that you have this whole range of the writers, the journalists, the social media people, whatever you want to call the broader stroke of digital tourism or digital journalists. But how do we capture all those stories and tell that to South Africans? Because we've got all this content that's sitting waiting here, all these captivating and enticing options, from the luxury hotels to the small little boutique places, the budget B&Bs. But how do we share those stories? And I think a lot of people are looking, I don't know about Heather and Sense, but certainly in my social media over the last while, I've never seen so many people making inquiries. The messages I'm getting daily, people saying, okay, we live over here and we're looking for somewhere to go that's going to be budget and it's going to be open air, or we're looking for this and we're looking for that. People are searching at the moment. And so how do we bridge that gap between telling the stories and the people? How do we do that? That's what I'm most excited about. Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And it opens up some other avenues. I mean, one of the interesting things is also this idea of, so there's been this massive growth in terms of social media and using that as a communication space. Travelers are also getting younger. They are engaging in that kind of environment. That's where a lot of people's travel dreams start from, is seeing someone else who went there and seeing that picture and then wanting to know more about it. And when we did a little study just before this webinar, my team and I did a little study. Actually, we have to thank Malusi Klatshwayo for it, looking at how many local tourism authorities in South Africa are online, and it was dire. There's an absolute paucity of local tourism authorities being online. The content that is out there is really not helpful to travelers. So what is the role? I'm going to ask Sisa, it's like a hot potato. What is the role of a local tourism, of a so-called LTA in this country? What are they meant to be doing?
Yeah, good question. Look, it's how our government infrastructure is staggered. You've got national, you've got provincial, and you've got local. And let me make an example. So you've got SA Tourism sitting at national, and then each one of the 9 provinces is a provincial local authority, right? Tourism authority, rather. Then you even find it further now that even at city level or metro level, right? Joburg has one, Ntshona has one, etc., etc. The problem with it is the coordination amongst all these, because none of these report to the other, right? So essentially, SA Tourism reports to the Minister of Tourism. Gauteng Tourism Authority reports ultimately to the Premier of Gauteng. Joburg Tourism Authority reports ultimately to the Mayor of Joburg. So it is this coordination that is part of the issue there. In fact, essentially in our recovery plan submissions, those are one of the elements that we raise about this, architecture of how tourism institutions are actually staggered in the country. That in itself becomes a problem. But essentially, the core role of the local tourism authority are to make sure that the environment is conducive for tourism to happen, right? That actually the services work, the parks are clean, there's electricity, there's water running, etc., etc., right? The other arm, such as ourselves, is we drive demand. So it's essentially to say, listen, Zanin, we are bringing or targeting 100,000 visitors this year. Do you have enough beds? Do you have enough attractions? Do you have the following, et cetera, et cetera? And they're supposed to enable themselves for that to happen. Over time, you get what we call scope creep, because everyone wants to be in the marketing demand side, forgetting that they actually need to create the enabling side. So that becomes a challenge in itself. Now, just picking up from what I'm seeing, some of the questions and comments there, certainly it's something that us at SA Tourism, we want to amplify quite substantially. And the one is around market access, right? It's essentially, how do we provide a space that allows all of the tourism players, and I'm talking about the big names, about the small names, the curators, et cetera, because if you look this from a consumer side, you actually say to the consumer, go chase one blog at a time, go to each website individually. If we had to bring these together so that anyone can go in, let's say to the SA Tourism website and find their joy as to what they're looking for, is something definitely that we bring this close. So therefore, we take away the sweat of trying to get your name out there, but rather focus on your delivery. That's what's going to give you your joy ultimately. And I've also seen comments around the booking platforms, and certainly it's something that actually gets me irritated from time to time. For me to travel locally, I have to book on a platform that is international in itself. And typically those charges are dollar-based or euro-based, and that transaction itself becomes an issue. Again, here, we've got to tread carefully as an authority, but is to say, how then do we create space for South African product owners and South African travelers themselves to find each other so they can do business amongst each other, and really unraveling a lot of what is there that previously is not known.
I wanted to also raise, in a pre-discussion with Senzelwe and Heather and Jared, we chatted about this idea of, am I the target market? And it also seems that a lot of products and destinations haven't really thought about who do they want to appeal to. And this idea of that there's quite traditional marketing in place. So you still will often find a white nuclear family, I'll be blunt, where the daughter looks like the mother, the son looks like the father, they come out of a box with the idea of that's who's traveling, which couldn't be further from the truth of what South African families look like. Some thoughts on that, Senzelwe? I know you had quite a bit to say in terms of, am I the target market? Will you take that on?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you said. In terms of marketing, just, I guess, not enough representation of the South African demographic. And I think another thing, when we talk about, am I the target market, and marketing, is, firstly, it's sad that we have to be so overt about making people feel welcome. I came across, it was a sort of an urban sanctuary called Riva Townhouse. I think they're in Sandton. And I was quite impressed with their marketing, but I also thought to myself, how sad is that, in their marketing strategy, they were very overt about South Africans, you are welcome. And then even breaking it down to kind of the kind of personality that's welcome in the space, to really make people feel like creatives, you can come and stay here. All these different groups that they mentioned. And so on the one hand, it was beautiful to see that happening, because from seeing their page on Instagram, I want to go there. I feel like it's a great place for a staycation, for an urban escape. And I feel like just from looking at their social media page that I would be welcome and feel welcome there. But then, yeah, it made me think, how sad is that we have to be overt about things like that. And I think a lot of kind of new entrants in the tourism space do feel like the space doesn't look like them. And I don't think it's only a racial thing. I think it's about age, and it's about, being able to search girls' trips or girls' safaris and seeing yourself represented in that space. I remember sometime, I think it was last year, we did a trip to Mpumalanga, and it was a very intentional trip, and we wanted to stay in a Black-owned lodge, and we just wanted to create content, even just the simplest thing as like a photo of 4 girls on a safari. That's something that we couldn't find. And so it's something we had to create. And so I think we do need to be a little bit more intentional about how we make people feel and how we welcome them in different spaces. It's sad that in 2020, that's the case, and we're having to do this very like overt marketing. And I know, Jared, you also shared about some people saying, will I be welcome in that small town? You know, Heather also travels to all these small towns. And I think there's a curiosity. I know, so my family and I, we've done a trip to Mpumalanga quite often, but we always stick to the usual things and the usual attractions and places. And I remember reading in a traveler magazine about a place called Kaapsehoop. And I was telling Laurice how the name alone had me a little, you know, taken aback, like, what is this place about? It's in Mpumalanga. Okay, this is really weird. But out of curiosity, I decided to discover that place and invite my family as well. So I said to them, okay, we're going to step outside of the usual a bit. Let's go and visit this small town. It's apparently really mystical and magical, and there's wild horses that roam free there. And we went, and it was an amazing experience. I don't think names matter to me personally, but it just goes to show the extent of like historical damage, that even a name can be off-putting. Yeah, but I think when we see more people in these spaces, which is why I'm so excited about, you know, what's to come after this. I'm so excited to share my travel experiences with other people so that they can feel like, okay, someone that looks like me is in this space and is traveling to this destination or is in this lodge. And so then there's nothing to fear. Yeah, I think that's what I can add. I'm just really excited to make people feel a part of the travel space. Yeah, it's called Kaapsehoop. It's a beautiful destination. Yeah.
The one person who actually has been traveling over this time, which Jared, you have been out while all of us have been locked away. Give us a sense of what is out there and what for you has been sort of a fresh view of things.
Well, the fresh air alone has been invigorating. As I'd made my journey back from Johannesburg to Cape Town, I purposefully decided to, through business travels, stop at 1 or 2 places and just to see what was happening. And Laurice, I think the first thing was the staff were just so excited to see a guest, to see somebody. And you could just see the excitement, but also the desperation in their eyes of just going, we can't continue to weather the storm. And so that was difficult to see and to hear their stories. But secondly, to be able to share their stories and share those places has been phenomenal, as I said. I mean, for me, one of them, I went from a lodge in the middle of absolutely nowhere, which looks like a luxury lodge, and that was 550 Rand a night a person. That's a few hours from Johannesburg. And I had about no less than 500 people writing to me, go like, are you sure you made it? That was not a mistake, it wasn't 5,000 Rand. Because it was so important for them to see that that's out there, and for me to see that. And then, of course, I contrasted it with a 5-star luxury game lodge that did cost on the high end. And so it was just remarkable for me to be reminded of what's out there and to be able to share that with people. Laurice, if I can just pop back to something that you spoke about earlier, the local tourism authorities and the challenges that they face. I think for us as travel writers have often worked with them. And I think as I started off with the travel writing, I often thought, well, they have to do everything. They've got the budgets, the manpower, they can do absolutely everything. And as I've built relationships with so many of these tourism authorities, I've realized that they're struggling because it's often one person sitting who's trying to, with such a limited budget, to profile numerous places. And so I think what the one word that I've loved that's come out of this time, out of the pandemic, is collaboration. I'm sure, Sisa, you've never seen the level, perhaps only when it went with the drought, when we were working with that in Cape Town, but on a national level, I've never seen such collaboration before with the tourism authorities and the local stakeholders and the writers. And I think that's going to be the mark of going forward, where a local tourism authority says, for example, Swellendam says, we want you to come and work with us, but we're going to partner with you, and we're all going to learn together. So collaborations, I think, is going to be one of the key things going forward.
I think also, I mean, it's interesting, the idea of the level of listening that can take place. I think in the quiet, there's an opportunity like never before for tourism authorities to plug into what are people saying. I'm so torn between wanting something official to tell me what to do, and on the other hand, doing it myself. So that's also, I think South Africa has always thrived because people do things in the cracks. They don't wait. And I think that's one of our assets, but it's almost trying to find the right accommodation with people doing it themselves and then looking up to some form of authority. I think authority needs to be reimagined as something that enables versus telling you what to do. And I think that's sort of been missing in the tourism space, because I think, you know, even just listening to Heather and Senzelwe and Jared, you see that things are already happening. I mean, in the work we do as Johannesburg in Your Pocket, we talk about the city all day long. There's so many partners out there who share a common belief in the destinations, but there's almost like an amplification that doesn't happen because no one on any official level seems to be listening. They're just making their own plans. So I think there's almost like a disconnect that needs to be, the plug needs to be put back into the power circuit in a way. I like to be very punctual, and we haven't even managed to get to a lot of the questions, but I know you've been looking at the chat. So we've got 2 more minutes, but I'm going to push you a little bit longer because I'd like each person to just have a sort of closing statement on any of the things that we've raised so far and what you think we should be taking forward. Sisa, we're going to start with you. We'll go back in our rounds.
Thanks, Laurice. Thank you very much for setting this forum, which I really appreciate the interaction. Certainly, I think my lasting message out there is for all those that are in the sector, there's definite hope. We will bounce back. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of if and not when. And I simply understand the frustration that each and every single one of us has in order to get the sector up and going. The key words here, I think, as Jared had highlighted, is collaboration. And certainly as one of our mantras at SA Tourism, we do nothing alone going forward. We all collaborate because essentially we can't be everything to everybody from the perspective. We are using this time, you know, within the organization, essentially to sharpen our axe and make sure when things do open again, we can be smarter, better, more efficient. Again, you know, to build all of those partnerships, to make sure that we can start to structurally change some of these things that have been pain points to all of us. Domestic tourism lies at the center of what we do. You know, we've often kind of said that if we can get all the other elements right, international, et cetera, if we don't get domestic right, that in itself becomes a problem. And I foresee a future that's got a big play on technology as an enabler, as a process that brings everyone together, that I can search, find things, you know, immediately. I can find the right price points, the right timing, and all the kind of things. And certainly we'll be making quite a significant investment in that space. But domestic tourism, always close to my heart. Thank you.
Great. We're going to move on. Just before we do, one cheeky question. Can safari vehicles register as taxis?
Ask me.
Yeah.
You always choose a government guy in the room.
It's a burning question.
I'm just an accountant. I've been to a bank and I work in tourism. I just got you. I don't.
Okay, we'll move on. Senzelwe, some closing thoughts?
I think the first is just to urge all of us and South Africans to just have a bit of a mindset shift, when it comes to tourism in general, specifically domestic tourism, and be open to all sorts of experiences and realize that a small town experience, a rural experience, a luxury experience are all valid and potentially amazing travel experiences. That's my first one. Is just, let's be more open-minded. The second one, my second kind of closing point is social media and its important role in just being a platform for us to share stories, for us to collaborate, for us to showcase and highlight experiences. And I think that we built so much community on social media that people take for granted and that we shouldn't take for granted. There's so much campaigning that happens on social media. All of us in our small spaces all have these communities who are super engaged, who are super interested in what we have to share. And so we should really use that. I think it's also a great tool for us to generate insights, for us to have conversations that can really guide where we should go in the tourism sector. And then lastly is just, collaboration. And I'm really excited that, you know, with or without kind of any formal assistance, people are bridging gaps, people are finding one another and creating travel content. I'm personally excited to just do more showcasing, experience more, and be that bridge between perception and reality. Yeah.
Thank you. Heather, your parting shot.
Yeah, this has all been very thought-provoking, so thank you to everyone. What the theme that just keeps going through my mind as I'm listening to everybody else talk right now is the theme of COVID-19 and the pandemic that we've all been talking about for the last 3 or 4 months, is that we all have to shift our thinking, you know, and I think I think tourists, South African tourists need to change their thinking, because it occurred to me as people were talking, and I've kind of forgotten this, but in a lot of conversations I've had with South Africans over the years, I think there is this perception that the aspirational travel is outside of the country, you know, because for all the years before 1994, for various reasons, people weren't able to travel outside South Africa. So there's this perception that, you know, Europe is where I want to go, or Asia is where I want to go, or America is where I want to go. And I think that just has to change, because those options aren't going to be open for a long time. And I think in the same way, the tourism industry also needs to change. You know, and I'm not a business person, but obviously the luxury travel space has to figure out some way to make itself affordable and marketable to locals. And I think within the already established domestic tourism space in South Africa, I think there's also a lot of work there to be done, making all South Africans feel welcome. Because I think that's really a huge one. I think within the domestic space, there's kind of a perception that there's a certain type of South African that travels and stays in small towns and in self-catering places, and that definition needs to expand significantly. And it's a big job, I think, to do that. So yeah, we all just have to change, because what choice do we have? And I'm looking forward to traveling all over South Africa as soon as I have the chance.
Thank you. Jared, your final words on this?
I've had conversation after conversation with hotel managers, GMs, who've been with me in tears over the situation. So I think just seeing some of the comments in the chat stream, people who are anxious, who are frustrated, who are angry, I simply want to say I'm really sorry that you've had to experience this. To the people like Melissa sitting in the winelands, who are passionate about wine and art and history, to Renee sitting in the UNESCO heritage site, the Vredefort Dome, to Velile in the Eastern Cape, who's passionate about the Wild Coast. To all of you in your stories, please don't let go of those. And if our voice might be small, but as the travel writers and the digital journalists, please know that we are holding you guys up, that we have your back, and we will, and we will continue to do everything we can to wave high your flag and the South African flag. So we're so sorry for the cost this has come to you, but hold in there. We are vouching for you.
Thank you. I think, we've got a long road ahead of us, and I think in some ways we've only touched the surface of what needs to be explored with more depth. And I think each issue that was raised, we could spend probably another hour exploring each one. So I want to thank you all for joining me. I would like to perhaps revisit this in a few weeks' time, because I think there's space to explore and go deeper into these issues. I hope for those of you who were listening and who joined that you got some value out of it. But I think, I think pulling together what everyone said, we have an unbelievable product. The challenge is, how do we tell people about it? How do we make people feel welcome? How do we talk about it in new ways and in a different way? And how do we also stop sitting with the problem we've got and look ahead to a new way of doing things, which I think is going to be vital. So thank you. I think before I go, Louise, if you have any last words. Everyone's saying, why has Louise not spoken all of this time in the background? So Louise, do you want to add?
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for noticing me here. I forgot that you could see me. I hope you didn't. I was trying to sit in front of the door so you couldn't see movement around there. I'm so desperate to go on a holiday. I think everyone is desperate to have a guest. I'm desperate to be your guest. I don't know, Laurice, maybe we get to work 4 days a week and we'll go on holidays for every weekend as soon as we're allowed.
Sounds like a fantastic idea. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Louise, for your work in the chat. Please, everyone, keep up the conversation with us. You have our contact details. And as I say, we will be continuing this round of discussions. And yeah, if you can follow us on all our channels to just kind of stay in the know of what we do. And again, a giant thank you to the panelists for joining us. I know time is precious, so thank you for giving of your time. And yeah, that's it. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Please do invite us again, Laurice. I think these conversations need to continue, not just one source. Thank you.
I will do. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurice.
Thanks.